With the other two estates, and that they were the French nation. They were the French nation. That's an explosion. That's an intellectual explosion that goes on here. But suddenly this thing swings outside of Versailles. It's rumored in Paris that the king is trying to kill these people in Versailles. So now you have an uprising in the Paris population. They storm the Bastille, remove the prisoners, kill all the guards. And what you have on July the 14th, Bastille Day, is essentially a radicalization of the urban population. Urban populace is radicalized by Bastille Day. They now have a part in the revolution too. So the wheel, so when we define the word revolution, it refers to a wheel. The wheel now turns. It turned first at Versailles. Now it's turning in Paris. And then in the next month, in August of '89, you have the wheel turn again because of what's called the Great Fear. You have 4 fear tracks coming out of Paris, spreading into the countryside, where we have eruptions all along these specific avenues where estates are burned, some aristocrats are killed, peasants are roaming the highways and burning everything in sight, and most of all, they're grabbing the tax rolls from each of the estates. These are the regional tax rolls, and they're burning the tax rolls. Listen, that's a revolution. Don't you wish you could get a hold of your IRS reports? Or your bank statements? I mean, the real ones? Not the paper shit you get, but the real thing. Would you not destroy a lot of this if you owed a lot of money? This is what they're doing. And so you have it's called the Great Fear. It's a radicalization of the rural masses. So the wheel turns again. Suddenly, the aristocrats throughout France, all of them, are in total panic that this thing is out of hand. It's no longer just isolated at Versailles. It's become a universal revolution. A revolution that no one seems to be controlling. It's not guided by the government. It's not guided by the leaders at Versailles, the Third Estate. It's got its own life. Now that's a real revolution. And it terrified everybody. It terrified the hell out of the British. Because the British said, when they watched this thing, they said, well, basically, we don't want this coming over here to Britain. We don't want anything like this to come over here. So everybody's now, and why didn't Europe do anything about it right then and there? Because there was a big event that everybody was watching that allowed most people to totally ignore the French Revolution until it was too late. The big event that no one today remembers or heard of was the partition of Poland. Now that's a big event, right? You know, what are you talking about? Nobody remembers it. Austria, Russia, Prussia are busy dividing Poland for the 3rd time into non-existence. Poland had the unfortunate position of being sitting between basically Germany and Russia. That's not a good place to be. And the Austrians, the Habsburg Empire just south of them, they're totally divided. Why? Because Poland is a dangerous area. You have the Polish Gap, invasions go both ways. So if you divide up Poland, you can at least get yourself a little security. That's what everybody's totally tapped into, intrigued with, and so forth. Nobody's watching the French Revolution except the English. So as it emerges, and by the end of 1789, what you have is the first phase here, I have over here, of the constitutional monarchy. You have a monarch that's now subject to a constitution. Taxation is now to be fair, equal, the nobility are to be taxed. Why would the nobility ever agree to be taxed, folks?
Because they'd rather be taxed than killed.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Rather taxed than killed. And they felt they were going to be killed. A lot of them totally renounced their noble titles, their noble privileges, their noble estates. They just pretended to get out of the way and just, I am just a humble peasant, you know. They gave themselves strange names just to hide from the crowd, hide from the masses. One guy, one of the Dukes of Orleans, chose to call himself, gave himself a new name and didn't crowd. Aren't you a noble? Oh no. What's your name? Ah, I am Philippe Egalite. I'm Philip Equality, baby. I'm with you. Peace, baby. You know, I can see this is the 60s, and now come to France. You know, I mean, and they're doing this all the time. They're trying to escape. Well, some do, some don't. Those that successfully escaped France were all the naval command, meaning commanders of the French Navy, the finest Navy that just beat the British Navy in the Revolutionary War. All those commanders now get the hell out of France. Why? Because they're all of noble birth, and they're all going to get killed if they stay in France. It's called the escape of the emigre nobles. It leaves the French Navy screwed for the next 20 years. Yes?
Did the role of revolution also, internally implode the army and the navy and?
Not so much the army, but more the navy, because you can't rebuild naval command. And that was their problem. They never had decent naval command after this. Never. That's why they had to rely on all things, the Spanish Navy. And Commander Villanueva to attack Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar. It's not anything they would have hoped for, but they did it. They lost half their ships to it.
Where did the French naval commanders go?
Most went to England.
So that's how the English got their navy back?
English had good command since the time of the Revolution. And they regrouped after that. They took it so hard during the Revolution that they had a major reform of the Navy in the works for 10 years prior to the French Revolution. So, and then of course any of those French naval commanders that want to command British ships are going to be able to do it. They're always looking for good command. Okay, and the British are not, I mean, the only thing that made them, but the British naval command still wasn't great. They still had 3 frickin' mutinies going on in the Channel. The only thing that saved the British Navy is at this time the French Navy was worse. So it's only going to get reform under Nelson, Admiral Nelson. Okay, the next, so we have the constitutional monarchy. But the king tried to escape. This sort of allows up the constitutional monarchy. I mean, that does undermine things a bit. The king escapes with his wife Marie Antoinette and the whole family. They get caught at the border. It's called the escape to Varennes, V-A-R-E-N-N-E-S. And the reason the king didn't make it is because he slowed down every hour to stop and eat. And to drink and have a little Vichy Soir, a little Chateaubriand for 2, lots of lugs of champagne. This guy is a king. I mean, I don't escape like anybody else. I escape like the king. Well, it's the royal frickin' coach. You know, with a fleur-de-lis design on it. You know, now there was a great movie that came out maybe 8 years ago, called The Escape to Varennes. French movie showing the escape of the king. It was quite hilarious. It was pretty good. There's been several interpretations of how this really happened. But the fact is, he has undercut his own constitutional monarchy. Because if you can't trust the monarch in a constitutional monarch, what does that do for that system? It's over. And so the government changes, the constitutional monarchy changes from that of the National Assembly under the constitutional monarchy to that of the National Convention, which forms the Reign of Terror, and that begins in the fall of '92. The fall of '92. Things change. They're becoming more radical. And the takeover of the National Convention and one of the major bodies of that convention, it's called the Committee of Public Safety. I love that one. The Committee of Public Safety is a watchdog group that sees everything in motion as absolutely anti-revolutionary and therefore should be extinguished. They form the basis of the Reign of Terror. So just put down the government of the Reign of Terror. What is so terrible about the Reign of Terror? They're cutting off everybody's head. And what's the chief architect of cranial dysfunction? The guillotine. It's an automatic weapon. No sword necessary. You don't shoot them, you don't hang them. You have what's called the national executioner, the national razor was one of the phrases used for it. They put the head in, pull down the block, pull the handle, chomp, off goes the head. Doesn't matter. It's estimated that probably 30,000 people in Paris alone died from the guillotine. But it spreads all over France, and anybody that speaks contrary to the government of the National Convention, and the king, what happens to the king? He is executed in January of 1793. That changes everything. So the Reign of Terror is now full blown. Who's the head of the Reign of Terror? Maximilien Robespierre. R-O-B-E-S-P-I-E-R-R-E. He's a total fanatic. He's a lawyer. Never trust a lawyer. We got any lawyers in this class? Any would-be lawyers? I don't trust you. I think half my classmates were not lawyers. Yep.
Why did the king try to flee?
Because he was encouraged that they were going to probably kill him anyway. He thought they were going to kill him. And he was urged by relatives across the border in the German states, we will provide safety for you, and so forth. So he's encouraged to try and make a break for it. But that just totally undermines the entire government when he does it. That's the end of the constitutional monarchy. So you have now the period of this Reign of Terror, the worst it ever gets. It spreads all over France. Thousands are killed. And then you have a reaction to that saying, this has gone too far. The reaction to it comes in July of 1794. And I'll spell it for you. It's called the it's called the Thermidorian reaction. T-H-E-R. M-A-D-O-R-E. The reaction of the month of Thermidor, the hot month of July. Thermidor reaction, or Thermidorian. What is that about? That means that people have turned against the excesses of the revolution. They have overthrown Robespierre. They capture Robespierre because they think he's just too unsafe to have around. Yeah.
Didn't Robespierre put himself as somewhat of a messianic figure?
Right. There's three guys: Robespierre, Danton, and Marat. And they're very. These are the three super revolutionary leaders. But Robespierre acquiesces to the execution of Danton because Danton's not pure enough. And that's when the rest of those in the National Convention say, wait a minute, Robespierre is untrustworthy, he's going too far, he may have us all killed before this is over. So they turn against him in July of, basically July of '94. And they will arrest him in that month at a meeting of the Committee of Public Safety. He tries to get away. He's shot in the jaw. He's hunted down in the cellar in Paris. They tie a rag around him to put his jaw back on. And they held him for a couple of days until they get executed in the guillotine. So it's a very bloody ending to a very bloody period. Who now takes over France doesn't happen until '95. They form a 5-man board of directors. It's called the Directory, 1795 to 1799. This is considered to be a very inept and very corrupt phase of the revolution, managed by a 5-man board of directors. Leadership, pretty unsensational. They still have a war going against everybody in Europe. And then following that, you have a young man who comes into power at this time, and he's out of nowhere. Young Napoleon Bonaparte. Guy, he's out of nowhere. He's from the island of Corsica, which France took over in the 1750s. His hero in Corsica was a freedom fighter named Paoli, P-A-O-L-I. Paoli was a leader against the French that wants France taking over Corsica. His parents yielded to French rule, however, and so what they did is, because Napoleon's from minor nobility, he was allowed to go to royal schools under French jurisdiction because he's minor nobility. He's not a peasant. He's not major nobility, he's minor nobility, which works out just wonderful. Why? Because he's now allowed to go to the French schools in Paris. His first school is Brienne. It's like a private school, K through 12. Only doesn't go through 12. Only goes to about 8th grade. He does very good. His work is good. He appears to be brilliant. Math. So he's allowed to go now to the next stage, and that's to the military school in Paris, the École, E-C-O-L-E, Militaire, French Military Academy. But because he's a minor nobility, he can't belong to the jazzy guys, the cavalry units, the glory boys. He can't do that because he's minor nobility. There's even discretion among nobility. You can't do that. So what does he get to go to? Well, he becomes involved in the high-tech stuff of his age, which was considered very low socially. Ballistics, artillery, map making, that is cartography, map making, all the grunt shit. But it turns out later, when the revolution comes, and he's trained in these things. Aerial dynamics, ballistics, artillery, map making. The revolution changes everything, and he who comes from minor nobility is now going to be allowed to raise to the top of the army based on his talents and abilities, not based on his status. So the French Revolution, following say the monarchy. Monarchy gives Napoleon his start, right? Because he's a minor nobility. Gives him his education. The revolution allows him, however, to rise in the ranks above his status because the revolution has gotten rid of the rank structure. So he's now able to raise in the ranks based on how he can perform. and it's during the period of the directory that he becomes available to the head of the directory, named Barras, B-A-R-R-A-S. Barras is facing a counter-revolution in Paris in 1795, almost immediately after coming to power. No one can stop this nightmare. It's counter-revolution. They're trying to overthrow the directory, and Barras calls upon this young artillery officer to come to his attention. Napoleon, and he still has his Corsican name. He's still called Napoleone Bonaparte. And he calls upon to stop these guys cold. And there's a very famous story called about the whiff of grape shot, meaning he loaded. This guy wasn't screwing around. He wasn't going to lead his boys into a cavalry charge against these guys. He says, get the artillery here. Does he know anything about artillery? Shit, yes. This is what he's been studying for the last 5 years. Put shells in? No, no shells. We're going to put grape shot in. That's shrapnel. With a capital S, a lot of broken crap. Launch down the barrels of these guns. At least 10 pieces of artillery looking at this crowd. And the normal way the French would handle this, you don't shoot the crowd, you fire over the crowd to get them to stop. To think about it, maybe back off. Napoleon says, no, you don't do this, because what he learned in the military academy was what? You fire into the crowd, you don't have them come back a second time. That'll scare the shit out of them right there. When you blow a hole through them, that'll stop them. Now, I don't know if it really does stop them or not, but it apparently did that day. It broke the back of the revolution. He saved the directory. He now is given command of a major job in the directory, and that is what? To take charge of the army of, it's called the Army of Italy. Make a long story short, it's his first major military command. The Army of Italy is the French army that should have been fighting in Italy against Austrian forces. Okay, don't get lost with all this stuff, don't worry about it. But basically, he's given command, and he said, he takes 6 months to get this army in shape. This army is absolutely, has no morale. They've been sitting on the coastal sections of the beaches of Cannes and Nice. I mean, this is a good life. Why the hell do I want to go to Italy and get killed? Okay? Climbing the Alps. Shit on that. I'm staying at the beach. I'm going to Santa Monica. And I'm going to stay there. I wish I could. Okay. I love Santa Monica. Now, yeah.
Can I ask?
You look too serious. Sure.
You had said that the rank structure in the military had been somewhat evolved or was removed.
The military structure had been set by basically the French structure on status. And you had status within the ranks. In other words, you had most of the major generals in the French army were from the upper nobility.
Right.
Lieutenants, captains, and so forth in the French military came to the ranks of the lower nobility. So you had this system, very stratified system all through the military. Along comes the revolution. You get a job based on what you can do, not who you know, and not what your status is. It breaks the system.
My question is, I wonder how that, or if that breaking of the rank system went down into daily life of what were called the common people, the bread makers, the manufacturers of clothes. I wonder if the rank system or the status
But
dissipated.
you mean in the military?
No, if that went into daily life or basic.
Yeah, you're talking about true social revolution. Does it really change? There's obviously some change in there. I don't know what it would be exactly, but it does break rank structure. But basically, you're going to stick with whatever is making money for you and your family. And if you are a metal worker, or you're a blacksmith, or a baker, whatever, you're going to stick with that pretty much. It's still, even now in France, it's still difficult to move between professions. You still, in other words, that system, which it was more apparent in France than anywhere else, was as much like caste as it was class. Very hard and fast. So when this revolution came along, and one of the things, the promises of the revolution was that it's going to bring about more of a concept of equality. And you're going to be recognized based on what you are able to do rather than who you know and what your status is. And that becomes important. That's really, Napoleon would have never happened had it not been for the French monarchy, and it would never happen that he emerged the way he did without the French Revolution. So both systems contribute to his becoming who he was. He's the only military commander in anybody's history that ever rose in the ranks as an artilleryman. And yet when he went into every battle he went into, that's what he used most effectively and just decimated everybody, was his knowledge of artillery. So now he takes over the army of Italy. It's supposed to go into northern Italy, cross into Austria, and gets into that region. And he has to get through a huge fortification called the Quadrilateral. 4 huge fortresses guarding the Alpine passes into Austria from North Italy. He's got an army of close to 100,000 men. But what he also has is the knowledge of how to use artillery against these fortifications. And in less than a week, he leveled the fortifications. I mean, they're rubble. And his army just went right through the Alpine passes. They're heading for Vienna. The Habsburg Emperor panics. He calls for his best commander to go stop this Napoleon guy. So Archduke Charles from Austria, leads his army into battle against Napoleon. Napoleon decimates him. Archduke Charles is one of the best fighters of his day. Napoleon just tears him apart. And on his own terms, he will dictate the peace terms to the Austrians. What kind of a guy is this? He's his own man. He doesn't call on the government. He says, no, I'm going to dictate the peace terms. So before I get your questions, I'm just going to say, the name of the treaty is the Treaty of Campo Formio, and this makes Napoleon. C-A-M-P-O. F-O-R-M-I-O. Campo Formio. He's dictating his own terms. And he sends a note back to his own government saying, this is what I have decided to do. And the governor of the directory says, holy shit, what the fuck? He's dictating terms. Who does he think he is? This is Napoleon. This is who he thinks he is. What do you think? I think I'm Napoleon. Okay, there were a couple of questions out there. 1, 2, and was there somebody else? 1. Okay, 1.
Wasn't the Archduke brother of Mary Antoinette?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Archduke Charlie always had a huge feather in his hat. And a goldfish on his ass. Yes, gold.
So what was the Archduke's name again? Sorry.
Charles. Okay. He dictates the terms. These are unbelievable terms. He gives France a whole bunch of territory that the directory never asked for, but they got it anyway. He's going to create out of Venice, Venice was an independent city-state. Venice now becomes a satellite state of France out of nowhere. They didn't know it, they didn't like it, they couldn't figure it out. And then he returns to Paris like a conquering Roman hero, with wagon loads of treasure from northern Italy. Why? Because he promised his men, he says, you follow me, guys, I will give you the treasures of Italy. He wasn't going to pay them in worthless French money, paper money. Stuff wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. He's going to pay them a genuine treasure that he's going to raid from northern Italy. And he does just that. That's how he pays his troops. And then he marches into Paris. They love him. They haven't seen anything this good since they were. What was the last event they remembered at all? Execution by guillotine of half the population. Now they're looking on a guy that brings glory to France. He's won victories. He's won the first victory in the coalition wars against the French. Who is this guy? He's not even French. He's Italian. And before they know it, he's going to bring real Italian family values into the French system. Meaning what? He's going to appoint all of his relatives as kings and leaders of the various satellite states of Europe under French control. They're all, it's the family. That's Italian family values. You bring in the family. It's the mafioso mentality. Basically, he's bringing them in. His sister gets a job. And he always listens to Mama, because Mama's telling him, you get your sister a job. Okay. So he's doing like he's a good Italian boy. And if you look at the books like dealing with the satellite states of Napoleon during the Revolution, all the stuff he does, all the appointees, he's got gobs of relatives that he's appointing in official positions all over. And I just love that. And they all get together every month and they have pasta, red wine, have a great time, And then he says, Giuseppe, you want a job? He says, yeah, of course. I haven't worked a day in my life, but of course I do. So he gets him a job. It's a setup. It's the family. And I just love that. Nothing like a good Italian family to do that kind of shit. I just think it's great. He's breaking all the rules of the French Revolution. But he doesn't give a shit. Why? He's not French. But he's going to use the system. And by the way, back when that slip of gun, grape shot, he killed about 50 Frenchmen that day. And most of the Frenchmen said, how can you do that? I don't give a shit. I'm not French. Of course, I don't care about you people. But I'm going to use the system. So he does. All right. So now, the directory's fumbling along, and the British response to all this are the wars against the French. First war, 1793 to 95. It's called the War of the First Coalition. Britain is determined to bring down this French revolutionary government. The British, at first, when the revolution first began, so let's look at it from the British perspective. When they're looking at this thing, they're thinking, actually they're sympathetic with it. France has always been a regime of an absolute monarchy without a democratic bone in its body. Never. And the British sort of had a kind of a sympathy for for any French attempt to free itself of that system. So after the meeting in Versailles, in the early days of the revolt, and the French established what began as a constitutional monarchy, that is, you have the king and you have the National Assembly working together. The British said, well, it's a very good idea. It's splendid. Why? It's just like us. It's a parliamentary democracy. They find it, Frenchies have finally figured it out. Well, but then when they executed the king, I love the British attitude on this one. Oh, how can who's anything? Execute the king. No, it's a regicide nation. Let's go piss on him. It's bad. Forgetting the fact that they are the ones that executed their own king in 1649. King Charles I. Oh, that's different. That's an internal problem. None of your business. So they support the French at first, and they turn against them, declare war on them in 1793. So they organize coalitions. Why organize a coalition? Because you don't have an army to speak of. How big is the British Army in 1793? 20,000. How big is the French Army in 1793? 200,000. Oh, that doesn't move very good. 200,000. How do the French get that? I mean, they have a big population, but how do they get an army that big?
They're the first ones to use the draft system.
What's it called?
Conscription. Mass conscription.
There's a French name. It's a name that sticks with it. Levy en masse. Leveeonmasse. It was formed by last name is Carnot, C-A-R-N-O-T. He's called the organizer for victory. He organized a citizen army based on basically a draft, what you said. It's simply called a levy en masse. It was a genius system. And it was not done based on pay, it was done based on patriotism. So they would have, the idea was they would have a much greater spirit of war in terms of the determination to defend their country, based on the concept of defending the nation. Okay. Oh, his full name is Lazare, I forgot that. L-A-Z-Z-A-R-E, Lazare Carnot, C-A-R-N-O-T. L-A-Z-Z-A-R-E, Lazare Carnot. This first coalition bogs down in 1795. It's the British, the Dutch, the Austrians are involved in this, and it bogs down in the middle of the Dutch territories, trying to raise an army that's heading toward crossing into France. Problem is, they got into quarreling among themselves, and that's the last time, the last and only time any of the British coalitions ever have a chance to actually win this war, cross into France, and hopefully defeat the French. The opportunity never came again. This army literally froze in the winter of '95. Froze to death in the lowlands of Holland, near the French border. What is today the Belgian and Dutch border? There was no Belgian there at the time. Very poorly led, infighting, destroyed. So none of the coalitions, by the way, ever work. Why do the British raise the coalitions? Because they don't have an army. They have to use and pay other armies to do their fighting for them. And they'll supply some of the troops and some of the generals, but basically they're going to supply their navy in the way they have done before and try to win that way. But they're going to pay, constantly pay Austrians, Russians, Spanish, the Dutch, Prussians, German states, anybody that will fight the French, the British will pay for it. Where are they getting the money? From their empire. Overseas trade, sugar, spices, overseas manufacturing, sales, overseas manufacturing. It's the first industrial empire emerging. There's a lot going on in its favor. They can afford to do this. But they never will have an army big enough to defeat the French. Okay. Now the French decide to turn the tail after '95. The government of the Directory honors Napoleon. By the way, he gets involved with Josephine. How many know of Josephine? Never heard of her? The love of his life. she was always sleeping with somebody else. Anyway, I kind of feel sorry for him. I mean, not that he's completely innocent, yeah.
She had really bad teeth.
She had what?
Really bad teeth.
Never met her. But, I'm sure he didn't have great teeth. Nobody did. Nobody had white teeth. Nobody flossed. No electric water picks, no nothing. Bad news. Okay. So they give him an assignment. It's been strange. He's the victor at Campo Formio. He's a hero in the country. But right now, he is deadly dangerous to the government of the Directory, because the Directory is a totally nondescript bunch of munchkins. There's nothing about them to admire. The government is very mediocre at best. There's nothing heroic about it. There's nothing to follow. I mean, anything that's run by a 5-man board of directors has got to stink. Okay. I mean, give me a sexy dictator any day. You know? A 5-man board of directors. Gee, what's that? It's like dealing with your bank president. God, you're an awful thought. Okay, so they give him a job. They want to get him out of the country. He's too damn popular. They want to get Napoleon out. Give him a job he can't complete. Maybe kill him off. Now he's gotten too powerful. They give him a job called Commander of the Army of England. Now, if the last job that he had was Commander of the Army of Italy, we know what that meant. Commander of the French army that's supposed to be operating in Italy. This is now commander of the French army that's supposed to go across the channel and invade England. Fat frickin' chance. You got no navy. Are you kidding me? You got to get him across. And the English Navy's out there waiting for you, and they have a new commander. He's a hot young ticket. Horatio Nelson. Nobody's beat him yet. So Nelson's waiting. Come here, make my day, motherfucker. Of course, he says it in French. I should have done it. I have to learn French. So he's earned it. He says, come on, make my day. Along, they give Napoleon the command. Napoleon takes a look at this thing. He says, he's got big issue vision-wise. He says, I want to rebuild the French Empire. I'm not dumb enough to cross the English Channel with the French fleet. We'll all be sunk. But what we can do is go after the whole British Empire by getting the jugular vein of the British Empire and strangle the British Empire, and that's if we grab Egypt. Egypt didn't belong to the British. Egypt was still part of the Ottoman Empire. It was also jurisdictionally being organized and run by the Mamluks of Egypt. Medieval warrior society. What's Napoleon's idea? To strike at the Middle East, and then from the Middle East attack British India and restore French prestige in India. Now, I don't know how practical that really is. That's a quantum frickin' leap. Who is he imitating? He's imitating somebody.
Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. It's exactly, because he doesn't think small, he thinks big. He has 20 ships on the line. These are the big ships. Naval command a bit doubtful, but 20 big ships on the line. His own command ship is called the Orient. The Orient. It's today at the bottom of Alexandria Harbor. They discovered it 2 years ago. Massive ship. Over 100 guns, 50 on each side. It's a big ship. 20 ships on the line, 300 small ships, schooners to transport troops and horses. He's gonna bring over 28,000 men and some 300 what are called in French savants, S-A-V-A-N-T-S. These are scientists, men of learning. They're going to try to translate the Egyptian ancient hieroglyphics and read them. Botanists that come over and study the plants of Egypt. Hydrographers, other words I've used, hydrologists is a different word, but men who understand how water operates. They want to build a canal at Suez. Then, even then, where did they get this idea? Way back in the days of Louis XIV, tried twice to deal with the Turkish Sultan to get permission to build a canal in Egypt, Suez Canal, between the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea. It's still feasible. So they brought these engineers, historians, to try and study the history of Egypt. Two printing presses, two Arabic printing presses, to try and print the concepts of the French Revolution, the rights of man, and other radical documents into Arabic. So he's got a kind of an interesting grasp on what he wants to do there. It's a very strange thing. He's going to colonize Egypt, is what he wants to do. So the year is 1798. He takes off from South France across the Mediterranean to invade the country of Egypt. And it is it's fairly successful. It's the summer. He avoids the British fleet. Nelson tries to intercept him south of the Italian peninsula near the island of Malta. A storm is hit. Napoleon's navy sails under the storm. They finally arrive in Malta. They leave again before Nelson gets there, and they finally arrive at Alexandria, Egypt, late June 1798. The British are sailing the Mediterranean trying to find them. They can't find them. Meanwhile, they capture Alexandria. There's virtually no resistance. And then he marches to Cairo from Alexandria in July. In mid-July, he meets the first opposition. It's a 20,000-man Mamluk army. Napoleon has 28,000 men. The Mamluks are all on horseback. They have these long medieval rifles, muzzle-loading rifles, M-A-M-E-L-U-K-S, or you can spell it M-A-L. L-U-K-E-S. People can spell it all kinds of ways. But basically M-A-M-E-L-U-K-S, Mamluks. They spot them within view of the pyramids. The morning sun comes up. It's in the eyes of Napoleon's army, marching eastward. The Mamluks are behind the big sand dunes, and the pyramids are in the distance. The Mamluks charge. What's their weapon of choice? These huge swords, these great scimitars. Big swords. What do the French have? Artillery! Loaded with what?
Grape shot.
Grape shot, shrapnel. They form into squares. 28,000 guys go into form squares, and they put 4 pieces of artillery in each square. And then you have the troops lined up on their knees and then standing up, so you got a constant fire going from the French riflemen. They open up the ranks, they open up with the artillery, with grape shot. The Mamluks crash into the French squares. They drag 3 or 4 Frenchmen with them, kill them before they die. You're going to lose an arm and a leg and everything. The French write about this, that's why we know. They're writing in their diaries. We couldn't kill these guys. They kept diving into us, and we blow holes through them, we take their arms and their legs, and they'd still keep fighting. It's not right. Why are we here? But it went down. 10,000 Mamluks were dead. The other 10,000 went back to Cairo, and then left with other Mamluks heading south into Upper Egypt, up south to Luxor. Napoleon comes, and it's called the Battle of the Pyramids. Napoleon glorifies this thing. He has paintings done, he has tapestries done, shows his little star up there, the star of fate that guides him, and these great pyramids, and this incredible battle which he wins, quote unquote wins. He barely gets into Cairo, patrolling the streets of Cairo, and suddenly he's got another problem on his hands. His fleet at anchor in a place called Abu-Qir Bay, A-B-U-K-I-R. Just next to Alexandria Harbor. The British discovered the fleet. Nelson found them. And he sailed in, and on both sides, surrounding the French fleet, on both sides going around it, he sank every one of the French ships of the line. His entire navy was sunk. That's called the Battle of the Nile. That's August the 1st, 1798. The Battle of the Nile. Napoleon, like it or not, is now stuck in Egypt. And he's going to lead a mad dash campaign to do all kinds of things. But basically, the British have now cut him off. The British will try to get rid of him by landing a Turkish fleet, that is a Turkish force, near Alexandria to trap Napoleon's men. What happens is basically Napoleon mows them down in the water using the shrapnel again, using the grape shot, the artillery. So the Turks are decimated trying to land. The British are trying to support that landing with the use of British artillery from the ships. It didn't work. So the British now have to send their own army into Egypt to get Napoleon. In the fall of October of 98, Napoleon decides to get out of Egypt. Desert the country, desert his army. He's got 20,000 troops left alive out of 28,000. And he sails back to France to overthrow the government of the Directory and take over, and his position will be the first consul. Napoleon's first consul in 1799, which will last until 1804. Okay. So, the British now have to send an army from India, an army from England, and an army from South Africa to converge on Egypt. One army converging from the Red Sea, the other army converging through the Mediterranean, landing on Egyptian soil, 1799, and within a year, they have defeated what's left of Napoleon's army, one in Cairo and one in Alexandria. They're thrown into prison. What's the one thing that Napoleon discovered in Egypt that makes this a great event?
The Rosetta Stone?
The Rosetta Stone. They were drilling an artillery ditch in the Rosetta branch of the Nile. They hit this massive, not a massive stone, but a sizable stone anyway, and dig it out, and they find 3 languages on it. They knew it had to be the key to unlocking Egyptian hieroglyphics. It still took them 40 years to unlock it. In the end, the French found it, but who took it? The British took it, and it's in the British Museum. Because the British captured the French, put them in prison in Egypt, and then finally a peace is signed, 1802 and 1803, the Peace of Amen. It's the only peace they'll ever have. 23 years of warfare. And during that peace, the French troops that were imprisoned in Egypt are allowed to be repatriated back to